Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Cape Elizabeth is a beach town near Portland, Maine. It has what you'd expect from a New England summer destination. A lighthouse, a fruit farm, and a watering hole near the beach, Kettle Cove Ice Cream and Shack.
We make homemade ice cream, and on the other half of our building we do like lobster rolls, fried clams, so we cater to the tourists and the locals for the summer.
That's Michael Concannon. He owns that spot, which locals call the Shack. In a typical year, business is good for an ice cream and lobster roll shop in Maine, where summer temperatures average around 70 degrees. But this summer, Cape Elizabeth is one of the many places that the National Weather Service is predicting to exceed normal temperatures. Michael says he's trying to get ahead of it by installing heat pumps to pull cooler air into the 100-year-old building where the Shack is located. But
they are expensive, so, for us to do it, we'll need 3 basically heat pump heads for my building, and that will add $25,000 that I was hoping not to spend this summer, but I am going to.
That's not to mention skyrocketing electric bills. He says his costs can go from $1,200 in a typical summer month to as high as $2,000 when it's especially hot. And all that warming, it's hitting his supply too. Temperatures in the Gulf of Maine just keep climbing. That means there's fewer lobsters available, pushing prices up.
Lobster rolls are really expensive anyways, but, say in the summer they're paying $23, $24 a lobster roll, and then all of a sudden it shoots up to $40. Most people skip the lobster roll.
Cape Elizabeth small business owners aren't alone in navigating the financial impact of a warmer planet. More than half the U.S. is predicted to see above-average temperatures this summer. And Bloomberg reporter Catarina Saraiva says that the heat could take a serious toll on many small businesses, which already operate on thin margins.
Small businesses, we know, employ about 50% of the U.S. workforce. They're a huge part of the economy, right? So anything that impacts them adversely, like these weather conditions, is a problem and a big problem for our wider economy.
For meteorologists, summer starts June 1st, and a government report is predicting extreme heat in places that aren't used to it, like Portland, Maine, and Spokane, Washington. And in places that can't afford to get any hotter, like Houston, Texas. Today on the show, we talk with economic analysts crunching the numbers and small business owners across the country who are feeling the squeeze of hotter summers. And we examine what solutions, if any, the government might be able to offer. From Bloomberg's Washington Bureau, this is the Big Take DC podcast. I'm your host, Saleha Mohsin. Catarina Saraiva is a Bloomberg economics reporter based in Houston. Summers there are always hot. Still, last year was different.
We're used to temperatures in the 90s and high humidity here, right? That's normal. But when you just have days on end where it's 110 degrees, it's really tough because, what do? You can't really go outside.
Last June, a high-pressure system known as a heat dome trapped warm air over the city and kept temperatures high. Texas's power grid buckled under a record demand for electricity. State and local governments placed millions of people under extreme heat advisories. It was life-threatening weather.
And that just continued into July and August. It's just miserable. No one enjoys it.
So how did you cope with it?
So we stayed inside a lot. When I walked by restaurants or stores, you just didn't see people inside because I think people weren't doing that. They weren't walking to these local small businesses.
Nobody was looking for a reason to be outside during this time period.
That's Ray Perryman. He runs an economic research firm out of Waco, Texas. Last year, his firm tried to put numbers to just how badly small businesses across Texas were hurt by the heat.
One thing that struck me on that one was the sheer magnitude of it, because the thing we found with regard to the major heat wave that occurred in 2023 was that on the whole, there were net losses to the state economy of about $9.5 billion as a result of this.
That's not easy to recover from. On a local level, Catarina's already seen some businesses closing their doors.
There was this beloved restaurant in my neighborhood that closed after many years in operation. You know, the owner talked about it just being more difficult to operate right now. The cost of food and labor rising, but then also hot temperatures putting a dent in your revenue.
But the impact is not just local. Catarina told me a hit to the Texas economy is a hit for the rest of the country, too.
Texas is obviously a huge state. It accounts for 10% of the national GDP. We account for 22% of all U.S. exports. So anything that's going on here obviously impacts the country more broadly as well.
There are 3.2 million small businesses in Texas. Emily Kerr, an economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, dug into how last summer's extreme heat impacted businesses across the state.
When this summer heat wave happened, we reached out to this group of over 400 Texas businesses and posed to them the question, did the summer heat wave have any impact on your business? And nearly a quarter of them said that it had a negative impact on either their production, if they were a manufacturer, or their revenue, if they were a services firm.
For restaurants and stores, that downturn was largely driven by lower foot traffic.
In fact, a Houston restaurant noted that it was the worst from a customer traffic standpoint than they'd experienced since they opened in 1967.
For manufacturers producing things like food and electronics, it wasn't demand that took the hit.
Their lost revenue came from lower productivity, lower labor productivity, temperature-sensitive work sites. And so these manufacturing companies were having to give workers more breaks, provide a lot more water, maybe pull back from outside and sort of exertion roles whenever it was so hot.
On top of bringing in less money, small businesses are also spending more, cranking their ACs just like the rest of us and dealing with surging electricity costs. Last summer in Texas, the price of electricity by some measures spiked 4 times. The state is in a unique position because it has its own power grid. That means there's no way to supplement it with power from the rest of the country when the state's electricity demand suddenly shoots up. In 2023, electricity demand in Texas went above 80,000 megawatts an hour for the first time, and not just once. It happened 42 times. Just look at Houston. The temperature there hit 100 degrees or higher for 45 days.
So what happens is that the grid regulator asks us to reduce our use of electricity.
Bloomberg's Catarina Saraiva again.
Without electricity, you can't do anything. So if your electricity gets cut because we're having rolling blackouts because the grid is overwhelmed, or total blackouts where you don't have electricity for a few days, it has huge ramifications on your production capabilities.
Catarina says the city of Houston has taken steps to mitigate the negative effects of the heat.
So, for example, the city has embarked on a big initiative to try to plant more trees, not just for absorbing carbon, but for providing that shade that really is a big relief.
They also turned city libraries into cooling centers on the weekends and encouraged residents to stay indoors. But a lot of the steps required to make businesses more resilient to extreme heat are landing on the plates of individual business owners. And this year's first heat wave is already underway in Texas and is expected to spread to the southeast. After the break, we hear about how small businesses around the country have tried to respond to rising temperatures and what local and federal government could do to help them survive these challenges. Part of being a small business owner is rolling with the punches.
I think a lot of these companies, especially after last summer, are coming up with ways to adapt.
That's Emily Kerr from the Dallas Fed.
Adding more shade as an example of, whether it's a theme park or a restaurant that has outdoor seating. Small businesses especially are incredibly resilient and have found ways to pivot their business model, adapt to a changing environment, and find ways to get through.
At Palmer Lane Maple in Jericho, Vermont, Colleen Palmer sells a local summer staple, maple-flavored soft serve.
That in Vermont, we affectionately call creamies.
Generally, summer heat is good for the ice cream business, but not if the temperature gets too high.
If it hits like mid-90s, it's too hot. Nope, Vermonters will stay home.
90 degrees in Vermont isn't 90 degrees in Houston. Vermont typically sees summer highs around 80 degrees. Most buildings don't even have central air conditioning. People aren't used to extreme heat, Colleen says that means she needs to stay nimble.
We watch the weather religiously to know how to plan, like how many staff do I need that day? How much mix do I need to order for the week? We may find that it's going to be really slow in the afternoon because that's the hottest part. But the evening, people will come out because it's cooled down a little bit. So we really just kind of adjust based on the weather.
But as Bloomberg's Catarina Saraiva says, sometimes being able to adapt requires upfront investment.
For restaurants, it's putting in big fans on the patios, water misters, things like that, that if you had a state program, that might help subsidize some of that, right? Cover some of those costs of installing those things.
The government recognizes this, and it's trying to support these businesses. The Small Business Administration offers a program that allows companies who have suffered from weather disasters to apply for loans.
So these are loans that have a lower interest rate than normal that businesses can tap to kind of try to mitigate some of these losses in revenue.
Think about it like the mom and pop loans from the height of COVID. Only this time, it's not a pandemic that's threatening business. It's the heat. But not everyone can access these loans. You have to meet certain criteria, and the government needs to declare a disaster in your state. And for some businesses, even a low-interest loan wouldn't be a quick fix. Brad Ervik owns Cherry Shack Orchard, a pick-your-own fruit farm near Spokane, Washington. The Pacific Northwest isn't a region known for extreme heat, but that's changing.
We've been doing it for 17 years, and when we started out, you just had the normal summer heat and it would go away. Now it just seems to be very dry and high heat for almost all summer, like 105 for many days in a row.
Brad says that keeps customers from coming out to pick fruit.
It's not like I want to go outside and pick the fruit. And of course, you have the fires.
Wildfires in the Pacific Northwest.
That's probably the biggest impact is the smoke for people coming out. It's horrible. I mean, there's times that you can't see probably 40 feet in front of you.
All this unpredictable weather, it's bad for crops.
We lost all our peaches and probably half the cherries.
That's because this winter was unseasonably warm. Then, a cold snap came in and killed a lot of Brad's fruit, which raises the question, how do you begin to recoup that kind of loss?
You don't. There's no recouping.
Brad says that he thinks the government could be doing more to help out small business owners like him. He hopes he'll be able to make up for his losses with a busy fall season. They have a pumpkin patch and a good apple crop. But Brad says that it's not clear what'll happen if temperatures just keep climbing year after year.
I don't know. It's a question. It's looming, I guess.
The Small Business Administration's loan program is a start, but it's worth noting that during COVID, they offered the option to apply for loan forgiveness, as in money that didn't need to be paid back. That is not available for weather-related events.
Hot weather, it might not be something that we traditionally have thought about as something that can weigh on the economy, but it's becoming apparent in these last few years that it is a major component of what's going on economically.
Thanks for listening to the Big Take DC podcast from Bloomberg News. I'm Saleha Mohsin. This episode was produced by Julia Press. It was mixed by Blake Maples, fact-checked by Adriana Tapia, and edited by Aaron Edwards and Wendy Benjaminson, who also provides editorial direction with Elizabeth Ponso. Naomi Shaven is our senior producer, Nicole Beamster-Boer is our executive producer, and Sage Bauman is Bloomberg's head of podcasts. Please subscribe and review the Big Take DC wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps new listeners find the show.